The champagne glass shattered against the wall 3 inches from the man's head, and the entire restaurant went silent. Caleb Hayes stood over him, 6'2" of Navy SEAL fists, clenched jaw locked. "Say it again," he growled. "Say one more word about her, and see what happens." The man who'd been mocking Amelia Whitaker turned white as a sheet. But here's what nobody in that room understood. Caleb had met this woman only 40 minutes ago. He didn't know her wealth. He didn't know her power. He only knew what he'd heard them whisper. Before you watch how this ends, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if stories about second chances move you, subscribe and stay with me till the very end. Caleb Hayes had not wanted to come. He'd said no 4 times. 4 separate phone calls, 4 separate excuses. And each time, his old teammate Marcus Bell had refused to accept it. "Cal, it's dinner." Marcus had said that afternoon, standing in the doorway of Caleb's modest house on the edge of the base. Not a wedding, not a commitment. Dinner. You put on a clean shirt, you sit down, you eat, you go home. That's the whole mission. "I've got Emma." Caleb had answered, folding a small pink cardigan and setting it on top of the laundry basket like it was ordnance he was diffusing. "Emma's staying with my wife and the girls tonight. It's already handled. Sarah's making them pizza and they're watching those cartoon horses she likes." Caleb had stopped folding. He'd looked at his friend for a long moment, and Marcus had seen it, the thing he always saw in Caleb's eyes these days. The tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep. "You've been coming home to an empty house for 3 years, brother," Marcus said, quieter now. "Sarah and I aren't asking you to fall in love. We're asking you to sit at a table with grown adults and remember what your own voice sounds like when it's not reading bedtime stories." And that was the sentence that got him. That was the one that landed. So now Caleb stood outside the Meridian, one of those restaurants where the valet took your keys like he was doing you a favor, and the front door weighed more than a car door. He tugged at the collar of the one nice shirt he owned. He hadn't worn it since the funeral. He didn't let himself think about that. "You clean up all right," Marcus said, appearing beside him with Sarah on his arm. "I feel like I'm about to be inspected." "You are. But they're a friendly crowd, mostly." Marcus grinned. "There's a woman coming tonight, friend of Sarah's boss. Sarah wants you to meet her." Caleb stopped walking. "Marcus?" "Just meet her, Cal. That's it. No pressure. You said the same words to me at BUD/S right before they put us in the surf zone at 2 in the morning. Marcus laughed. "And you survived that too." Inside the place was warm and gold lit, and full of the low murmur of people who were used to being listened to. Caleb had spent his whole adult life in rooms full of hard men who'd earned their confidence in blood and mud. This was a different kind of confidence. Softer, bought, not built. He recognized it the way you recognize a foreign accent. They were seated at a long table near the back. There were maybe 10 people already there, executives, a couple of doctors, a woman who ran some kind of foundation. They shook his hand and asked what he did, and when he said, "I'm in the Navy," a few of them nodded politely and then didn't know what else to say, and the conversation moved on without him. That was fine. Caleb was used to being in a room without being in the conversation. He sipped his water and watched the door and thought about whether Emma had eaten her vegetables. And then the door opened, and everything in the room changed. Caleb felt it before he saw it. A shift in the air. The murmur dropped half a register. Heads turned toward the entrance, not all the way, just enough. Just enough to look and then look away, and then lean toward the person next to them and murmur something behind a raised hand. The woman who had walked in was tall, dressed in deep navy blue, and she was heavy. Plus size, they'd say now. Fat, they'd have said in the world Caleb grew up in, and they'd have said it cruel. She had a face that would have stopped him on any street. Warm brown eyes, a strong jaw, dark hair pinned up with a few strands escaping, but the room wasn't looking at her face. Caleb watched the room not look at her face. He watched a man 2 seats down lean toward his date and whisper something, and he watched the date press her lips together to keep from laughing. He watched the woman see all of it. That was the thing that got to him. She saw it. She wasn't oblivious. She walked into that gold-lit room, and Caleb watched her register every whisper, every sideways glance, every polite smile that didn't reach the eyes, and he watched her keep her chin level and her shoulders back and walk toward the table anyway like a person walking into a wind. "That's her," Sarah whispered, leaning across Marcus. "That's Amelia. Cal, she's remarkable. She runs—" "Amelia," said the man 2 seats down, the one who'd whispered. His name was Preston something. Caleb had already forgotten. He had the loud, easy voice of a man who'd never once been told to be quiet. "We'd almost given up on you. Traffic?" "Something like that," Amelia said. Her voice was low and even. "Well." Preston smiled and gestured at the empty chair which happened to be directly across from Caleb. "We saved you a seat. Hope it's a—" He glanced at the chair, then back at her, and let the pause do the ugly work. "Comfortable." A couple of people laughed, not loud. Just a breath of it. Just enough, and Caleb watched something flicker across Amelia's face, a flinch quickly buried, and he watched her decide to absorb it the way he'd seen men absorb a blow they'd decided wasn't worth answering. She reached for the chair. "Let me apologize," she said, and her voice was smooth and professional, and Caleb hated it, instantly, hated that she'd learned to sound like that. "I'm late. I've kept everyone—" "You don't have to apologize." The words were out of Caleb's mouth before he'd decided to say them. The whole table looked at him. He was already standing. He didn't remember standing. He crossed behind the chair, pulled it out the good solid pull, the way his own father had taught him to seat a lady before Caleb was old enough to shave, and he held it steady and looked at her. "You don't have to apologize for anything," he said. "Please, sit down." For a second, Amelia Whitaker just looked at him, and Caleb saw up close that she was tired in a way that went past the day. It was the tired of someone who'd been holding something heavy for years without being allowed to set it down. "Thank you," she said quietly, and sat. Caleb pushed the chair in for her gently and returned to his own seat across from her, and the table sat there in an awkward silence until Preston cleared his throat. "Well," Preston said, recovering his smile, aiming it at Caleb like a challenge. "And who's this, the gallant stranger?" "Caleb Hayes." "Caleb's a friend of ours," Sarah said quickly, warmth in her voice. "Navy." "Navy." Preston nodded, and Caleb watched him do the math. Watched him take in the clean but cheap shirt, the calloused hands, the haircut that came from a base and not a salon. Watched him file Caleb somewhere below himself. "That's good. That's good. My father served. Great respect for it. So what do you do in the Navy?" "Caleb push papers or—" "Preston," Sarah said. "I'm asking the man a question. I do whatever they tell me to do," Caleb said pleasantly. "Mostly I try to bring everybody home." Something in the flatness of the way he said it made Preston's smile falter for just a second. Then it recovered. The dinner went on, plates came and went, and Caleb, who had spent the whole first hour invisible, found that he had stopped being invisible because he had stopped paying attention to the people who were supposed to matter, and started paying attention to the one person the whole table had decided didn't. Because here's what Caleb noticed. The moment the conversation turned to business, the whole table leaned toward Amelia. Suddenly, she wasn't invisible at all. Suddenly, they wanted her. They wanted her opinion on the markets. They wanted to know what she thought about some acquisition. They asked about her company, her valuation, her plans for expansion. And Amelia answered every question with a sharp, easy brilliance that made the whole loud table go quiet and listen. Caleb watched grown men who'd been smirking at her 40 minutes ago now hang on her every word, and he understood something that made his stomach turn. They didn't respect her. They wanted something from her. Those are not the same thing. Caleb had learned that distinction the hard way in places these men would never go, and he could spot the difference across a table in the dark. So when there was a pause, when Preston finally ran out of questions about her money, Caleb spoke. "How was your day?" he asked. Amelia turned to him. "I'm sorry." "Your day." Before all this, how was it? She looked at him like he'd asked her a question in a language she'd forgotten she knew. It was... She started and stopped. It was long. Long good or long bad? A small, surprised sound came out of her, almost a laugh. Long complicated, she said. I let 200 people go today. The table, which had drifted into its own conversations, didn't hear this, but Caleb did. You laid off 200 people, he said. I did. And everybody here spent an hour asking you what it does for your stock price. Amelia's jaw tightened. That's the part that matters to them. Which part mattered to you? She stared at him. And for a moment the professional smoothness cracked just a hairline crack, just enough for him to see through. Every one of them had a name, she said quietly. I read the list this morning before I signed it. I made myself read every name. She looked down at her hands. That's the part that mattered to me, not that anyone asked. I'm asking, Caleb said. She looked back up at him, and that was the moment Caleb would think about it later, lying awake in the quiet of his own house. That was the exact moment something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, just recognition. Two people who'd learned to carry heavy things quietly, finding out they weren't the only one in the room. You didn't do it because you're cruel, Caleb said. You did it because you thought it was the only way to keep the other people employed. How would you... Amelia stopped. How do you know that? Because a cruel person wouldn't have read the names. Across the table, Preston laughed loudly at something, and the sound of it was obscene in the small quiet the two of them had built. Amelia looked at Caleb for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? When Sarah said there'd be a soldier, I thought... She hesitated. I thought you'd want to talk about yourself. Most men do, especially the impressive ones. She said the word impressive with a faint, tired irony, and Caleb understood that she'd sat through 100 of these dinners across from 100 impressive men, all of whom talked about themselves. I'm not that impressive, Caleb said. I doubt that's true. I burn toast about twice a week, and my daughter has to remind me it's picture day at school, he said. I'm exactly that impressive. And Amelia Whitaker, billionaire CEO, the most powerful person at that entire table, laughed. A real laugh this time, not the polite kind. She put her fingers to her mouth, like she was surprised to hear it come out of her. You have a daughter, she said. Emma, she's 7. She runs the house. I just live there. Where's her... Amelia stopped herself. Her mother passed, Caleb said. He said it the way he'd learned to say it plainly so that it didn't ask anything of the other person. 3 years ago. Car accident. It was fast. I try to be grateful it was fast. Amelia's face changed. All the professional armor was gone now. I'm so sorry, she said, and Caleb could tell she meant it because she didn't rush to fill the silence afterward the way people usually did. She just let it sit there, honored it the way you're supposed to. Thank you, Caleb said, raising her alone. That's... Amelia shook her head slowly. I run a company with 9,000 employees, and I'm not sure I could do what you do. You could, Caleb said. You'd be surprised what you can do when there's a kid looking at you who needs you not to fall apart. She was quiet. That's the thing nobody tells you. Caleb went on, and he wasn't sure why he was telling her this stranger, except that she was actually listening, and it had been a long time since someone had actually listened. When my wife died, I thought I was done. I thought that was it. But you can't tell a 7-year-old you're done. You can't tell her the world's over. So you get up, you pack the lunch, you braid the hair even though you have no idea what you're doing, and it looks like hell, and she cries because the other girls' moms do it better. His voice caught just slightly, and he cleared his throat. And then one morning you realize a year's gone by and you're still standing. Because she needed you to be. Across the table someone called Amelia's name, Preston again, wanting her attention for something. And Caleb watched her do something that surprised him. In a moment, she said without looking away from Caleb. I'm in the middle of a conversation. Preston blinked. He wasn't used to being told to wait. Amelia turned back to Caleb. Keep going, she said softly. And so it went for the rest of the dinner, the two of them building a small warm room inside the cold gold one. The others tried to pull Amelia back into the business talk, the flattery, the extraction, and one by one she declined them, until eventually the table gave up and the conversation flowed around them like a river around a stone. But it wasn't all warmth. Because Preston, who had been drinking steadily and who did not like being made to feel small, was not done. So Caleb, he said, cutting across the table with the loud voice again, tell me something, man to man. He gestured with his wine glass sloppy now. What's your angle here? The table quieted. My angle, Caleb repeated, with Amelia. Preston smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I mean, come on. Let's be honest. We're all adults. A guy like you, government salary, single dad, and here's one of the richest women in the country sitting across from you being all... He waved his hand, charmed. I'd be working an angle too. No shame in it. Just curious what the play is. Marriage investment. She fund your little... Preston? Sarah's voice was sharp. It's a fair question, Preston said. Somebody's thinking it. I'm just the one with the... The glass shattered against the wall. Caleb had thrown it. Not at Preston 3 inches wide, deliberately wide, a man who could have hit a dime at that distance, choosing to miss. But the crack of it, the violence of the sound in that soft gold room, brought the entire restaurant to a dead stop. Caleb was on his feet. He didn't remember standing this time either. Say it again, he said. His voice was very quiet, which was worse than loud. Say one more word about what she's worth. Say one more word about her at all, and see what happens. Preston had gone white. You've spent this whole dinner talking about her money, Caleb said. Every single one of you. You want to know what her angle is. She doesn't have one. You know how I know. Because she laid off 200 people today, and she read every one of their names because she couldn't stand not to, and not one of you thought to ask her if she was okay. You asked about her stock. You asked about her company. You asked her to fix your portfolios. Not one of you asked her a single human question all night. The room was silent. I met her 40 minutes ago, Caleb said. I don't know how much money she has. I don't care. I know she's the only person at this table I'd want to have dinner with again, and if that makes me the one working an angle... He looked around at all of them. Then God help every one of you because you've forgotten what people are for. He turned to Amelia. His voice dropped gentle, the anger draining out of it all at once. I'm sorry, he said. That wasn't my place. But I couldn't sit here and let him. Amelia was looking up at him with an expression he couldn't read. Her eyes were bright. Sit down, Caleb, she said softly. Please. He sat. The dinner did not really recover after that. Preston left early, muttering his date trailing behind him. The others made careful conversation and avoided looking at either Caleb or Amelia. Marcus caught Caleb's eye across the table and gave a small nod, not approval exactly, but something like it. Sarah looked like she wanted to hug him. But it was Amelia who Caleb was watching. Amelia, who had gone very quiet, who had barely touched the rest of her food, who kept sneaking glances at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. When the check came, and there was the usual dance of people reaching for wallets, Amelia reached for hers, and every man at the table led her the way they clearly always did. I've got it, Caleb said. Caleb, Sarah started. The bill here is. I've got it, he said again, and he put down his card, the one card he had, the one he watched carefully every month, and he did not look at the total. He would look at it later at home, and he would sit down hard when he saw it, and he would move some things around and cover it, and never say a word to anyone. But that was later. Right now, he just put down the card. Amelia stared at him. You didn't have to do that, she said. Do you have any idea what that... I know exactly what it costs, Caleb said. That's why I did it. Outside, the valets brought the cars. Amelia's was a long black one with a driver. Caleb's was a 9-year-old truck he'd driven himself. They stood on the curb in the cool night air while the others said their goodbyes and drifted off, and then it was just the two of them, and the driver waiting a discreet distance away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "That was the most anyone has stood up for me in a very long time," Amelia said finally. "Maybe ever, and I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of powerful men." "They weren't powerful," Caleb said. "They were loud. It's not the same thing." She smiled a small, tired, real smile. "No," she said. "It isn't. I meant what I said. In there." Caleb looked at her. "About having dinner again." Amelia's smile faded into something more careful, something more guarded. And Caleb watched the armor start to come back up, watched her reach for the smooth, professional voice, the one he'd hated all night. "Caleb," she said, "you seem like a genuinely good man, and I've had a lovely evening, but I think we both know that—" "Know what?" "That this—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at him, at the space between them. "This isn't—" She stopped, started over. "I'm not what men like you." "Don't do that," Caleb said quietly. "Do what?" "Decide for me. Decide what I want before I've told you. You did it to yourself at that table all night, sat there and took it, decided you had to. You don't have to, and you don't get to decide what I think about you either." Amelia stared at him, and Caleb saw in the streetlight that her eyes had filled. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice was not smooth now, not professional, it was raw. "I have spent my whole life having men look at me and do math, what I'm worth, what I can do for them, what they'd have to overlook to—" She stopped and swallowed hard. "The last man I let in told his friends I was successful. Successful. Like that was the polite word. Like he was explaining a choice he had to defend. He didn't want to be seen with me. He wanted the account, not the—" She shook her head sharply. "So, forgive me if I've stopped believing that a man can just—" "How was your day?" Caleb said. She stopped. "What?" "When I asked you that in there, before I knew anything, before Preston opened his mouth about your money." He took a step closer. "I didn't ask because I wanted something. I asked because you looked tired and nobody else was going to. That's it. That's the whole angle. There isn't another one." Amelia was crying now, quietly, the way people cry when they've spent years teaching themselves not to. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "I don't cry," she said, half laughing, furious with herself. "I don't do this. I run a company. I've closed billion-dollar deals. I do not stand on a sidewalk and—" "You don't have to apologize for it," Caleb said. It was the same thing he'd said to her when she'd sat down. He said it exactly the same way. "You don't have to apologize for taking up space. You never did." And that was the sentence. Of everything he'd said that night, the confrontation, the check, the standing up. That was the sentence that broke all the way through. Because no one had ever said it to her. Not once in 35 years. Everyone in her life, in one way or another, had asked her to be smaller, to take up less room, to apologize for the space she occupied in the world. And here was a man she'd met at dinner, a widower with calloused hands, and one nice shirt, telling her the opposite. Telling her she was allowed to exist exactly as large as she was. "Who are you?" Amelia whispered. "I already told you," Caleb said gently. "I'm the guy who burns the toast." She laughed through the tears. And it was such a real, helpless human sound that Caleb felt something in his own chest loosen, something that had been clenched tight for 3 years since the night 2 officers had come to his door with their hats in their hands. He hadn't felt it loosen until right now. "Have coffee with me," Caleb said. "Not dinner, not one of these." He gestured at the restaurant behind them, all gold and glass. "Not this, just coffee. Somewhere with paper cups and terrible chairs. Tell me about the 200 names. I'll tell you about the toast. That's all. If you hate it, you never have to see me again." Amelia wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, careful of the makeup, and let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't drink coffee at night," she said. "It keeps me up." "Then breakfast," Caleb said. I'm up at 6 anyway. I've got a 7-year-old. She looked at him for a long, long moment. The driver waited. The city hummed around them. And Caleb watched Amelia Whitaker do something that he would only later understand had cost her more courage than any deal she'd ever closed. He watched her decide to hope. 6 is too early, she said. I'm rich, not insane. 7 then. 7:30. 7:30, Caleb agreed. The smallest smile. There's a diner, she said. On 5th. Nothing fancy. Terrible chairs. The coffee's bad and the pancakes are worse, and I love it, and I've never once taken anyone there because they'd all hate it. I'll love it, Caleb said. You don't know that. I'll love it, he said again, because you love it. That's how it works. Amelia looked at him, and there was something new in her face now, something Caleb hadn't seen all evening, something that had been buried so deep she'd probably forgotten she still had it. It was the look of someone who had stopped just for a moment being afraid. 7:30, she said. Don't be late. I hate waiting. I've never been late to anything in my life, Caleb said. It's a disease. My daughter thinks it's a personality flaw. Smart girl. The smartest. Amelia's driver opened the door of the long black car. She moved toward it, then paused, one hand on the frame, and looked back at him over her shoulder. Caleb, she said. Yeah. Thank you. She said it plainly, the way he'd taught her a few hours ago, without either of them realizing he was teaching her anything. For asking about my day. And then she was gone. The car pulling smoothly away into the river of city lights, and Caleb Hayes stood alone on the curb outside a restaurant he could not afford, in the one nice shirt he owned, and realized that for the first time in 3 years, he was not dreading the drive home to the empty house. Because it wasn't going to be empty tomorrow. Emma would be back in the morning, wild-haired and demanding pancakes. And after that 7:30, a diner on 5th terrible chairs. He got in his truck. He sat there for a second before he turned the key. He thought about the way Amelia had walked into that room, like a person walking into a wind chin level, taking every blow, and he felt the anger come back up hot in his chest. Not at Preston. Not really, but at all of them, at a whole world that had spent 35 years teaching a brilliant, kind, tired woman that she had to apologize for the space she took up. Then he thought about the way she'd laughed on the sidewalk, the way she'd said, "Keep going," when Preston tried to pull her away, the way she'd looked back at him from the car. And Caleb, who had learned a long time ago in the hardest school there is, that some missions are worth everything. You have gripped the wheel of his old truck and made himself a quiet promise in the dark. She would never have to walk into a room like that alone again. Not while he was standing. He turned the key. The engine coughed and caught. And he drove home through the sleeping city, and the house was quiet when he got there, and Emma's little pink cardigan was still folded on top of the laundry basket where he'd left it, and for once the quiet didn't feel like grief. For once, it felt like the calm before something good. He set his alarm for 6. He did not need to. He was already awake long before it rang, lying in the dark, thinking about a diner on 5th Street and a woman who had spent her whole life being told to take up less room, and about the exact moment on a cold sidewalk when he'd watched her decide against everything the world had taught her to believe him. Downstairs in the quiet kitchen, Caleb made coffee he wouldn't drink and stood by the window and waited for the sun to come up. It was the longest he'd looked forward to a morning in 3 years. The diner on 5th was exactly as bad as she'd promised, and Caleb loved it exactly as much as he'd said he would. He got there at 7:19. He'd told himself he wouldn't be early, that being early would look eager, would look like the angle Preston had accused him of. And then he'd sat in his truck in the parking lot from 7:04 until 7:19, fighting himself before he gave up and went in. The waitress, a woman past 60, with a name tag that said Doris and a face that had seen everything twice, told him to sit anywhere. "Meeting somebody?" she asked, pouring the coffee before he'd asked for it. "Yes, ma'am." "She pretty?" Caleb thought about it. "She's the smartest person I've ever talked to," he said. "And yeah, she's beautiful." Doris raised an eyebrow. "Both, huh? Don't screw it up." Working on it. Amelia came in at 7:31. He watched her come through the door and hesitate, that same half-second hesitation he'd seen at the restaurant, the reflexive bracing the scan of the room to see who was looking. Except nobody was looking. It was a Tuesday morning diner full of truck drivers and old men with newspapers, and not one of them lifted his head. Caleb watched her register that. Watched her shoulders come down half an inch. Then she saw him already standing, already pulling out the chair, and something in her face went soft and exasperated at the same time. "You don't have to do that every time," she said, sitting. "Do what be, the chair." "My father did it for my mother every day for 41 years, Caleb said, sitting across from her. Last thing he did before the stroke took him, she came into the kitchen, and he stood up to pull her chair out, and he couldn't remember why he was standing. He just knew he was supposed to stand when she came in the room. He shrugged. "So yeah, I'm gonna do it every time. Sorry." Amelia didn't say anything for a second. Then, "That's the saddest and nicest thing anyone's told me before 8 in the morning. I'm a fun date. You'll see." Doris appeared. "Coffee, hon?" "Please," Amelia said. "And do you have bitim? Pancakes are terrible," Caleb said. "I'm told. Reliable source." Amelia shot him a look. "The pancakes," she told Doris, "are perfect, and I'll have a full stack, and don't listen to him, he's new." Doris looked between them, decided she liked whatever this was, and went to put the order in. "So," Amelia said, wrapping both hands around her coffee cup. "You came. You sound surprised." "I am a little." "Why?" She looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Because in my experience, the things men say on a sidewalk at midnight and the things they actually do at 7:30 in the morning are usually two very different things." "That's a sad experience." "It's an accurate one. Both can be true," Caleb said. She almost smiled. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Saying the thing that's actually true instead of the thing that's supposed to make me feel better." She set the cup down. "I don't know what to do with it. I've spent 15 years in rooms where every single word is a negotiation, where nobody says the true thing, they say the useful thing, and you just—" She made a small, helpless gesture. "Say it. It's disorienting. You want me to lie to you, I can lie. What do you want me to lie about?" "No," she said. "God, no. That's the problem. I don't want you to lie, and it terrifies me that I don't." And there it was, the thing Caleb had already begun to understand about her, the thing that would take months to fully see. That Amelia Whitaker was not afraid of hard truths. She was afraid of soft ones. She could stand in front of a board and deliver catastrophic news without her voice shaking. But a man being kind to her over bad diner coffee, that could take her apart. "Tell me about the 200 names," Caleb said. She blinked. "You remembered that." "I remember everything you said. It's a problem. Ask my daughter. I never forget anything. She promises she'll clean her room." So Amelia told him. She told him about the division she'd had to close a hardware unit, 3 years of losses, a bet that hadn't paid off. She told him she'd fought the board for 18 months to keep the people, and how she'd finally run out of arguments. She told him about the engineer, a man named Ramirez who'd been with the company 11 years, who'd sent her a 2-line email after the layoff. Not angry. Just 2 lines. "Thank you for the years. I know you fought for us. Take care of yourself." And how she'd read those 2 lines in the back of her car and cried so hard the driver had pulled over. "He thanked me," she said. "I fired him, and he thanked me. And I keep thinking that's the kind of man I let go. And the kind of man I keep, the kind who does well in that world, is a man like Preston." She shook her head. "Something's wrong with the whole thing, and I built it. I built the thing that's wrong." "You didn't build it," Caleb said. "You inherited it. There's a difference. I run it now. That makes it mine." "You read the names," Caleb said. "Preston wouldn't have read the names. That makes it different." She looked at him for a long moment. "You keep giving me back the same thing, the names, like it's proof of something." "It is proof of something." "Of what?" "That the world hasn't got to you yet," Caleb said. "Not all the way. You're still in there. Most people in your position, by the time they've got what you've got, there's nobody home behind the eyes anymore. It's just the machine running the person. You're still in there. That's rare. That's the whole thing, actually. That's everything. The pancakes came. They were, in fact, terrible. Amelia watched him take a bite and try to keep his face neutral, and fail, and she laughed so hard she had to put her fork down. "Told you," Caleb said, chewing valiantly. "You said you'd love them." "I love them because you love them. It's a package deal. I never said the pancakes themselves had merit." "They're awful," Amelia admitted, delighted. "They've always been awful. I've been coming here for 6 years. My assistant thinks I have a secret second office. I just come here and eat terrible pancakes, and nobody knows who I am, and nobody wants anything from me." Her smile faded slightly. "You're the first person I've ever brought." "Why me?" She considered the question honestly. That was another thing about her. He was learning. She took questions seriously, turned them over, gave you the real answer instead of the smooth one. At least when she trusted you enough to. "Because you asked how my day was," she said finally. "Before you knew I could do anything for you. Do you understand how rare that is in my life? People are kind to me constantly. Doors held chairs, pulled, compliments, gifts. But it's all deposits. They're all making deposits, and one day they're going to make a withdrawal, and they're keeping track the whole time. You asked how my day was, and there was nothing in it for you. You didn't even know who I was." She looked at him. "I've been trying since midnight to figure out what you're keeping track of. And I can't find it. It's driving me insane." "There isn't anything," Caleb said. "I keep telling you that." "I know. That's the insane part. I believe you." They stayed at that diner until 11. Doris refilled the coffee 4 times and stopped charging for it after the second. And when they finally walked out into the parking lot, blinking in the daylight, neither of them wanted the morning to end, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it. "I have a company to run," Amelia said, not moving toward her car. "I have a daughter to pick up from a birthday party at 2, Caleb said, not moving toward his truck. So I should go," she said, and didn't. "You should." Caleb agreed, and neither of them moved. It was Amelia who finally broke. "Do this again," she said. "The diner. Or something. I don't care what. Do it again." "Tomorrow," Caleb said. "I can't tomorrow. I have Tokyo on a call at—" She stopped. Thursday morning. Thursday. That was how it started. Diners and coffee, and eventually longer things. A walk that turned into 3 hours. A phone call that was supposed to be 5 minutes and ran until Caleb's phone died. They were on paper the most mismatched 2 people imaginable, the widower with the government salary and the billionaire with the private plane, and in every way that Caleb had learned actually mattered, they were the same. Both had learned to carry heavy things without letting anyone see the strain. Both had gotten so good at being fine that they'd forgotten what not fine even felt like. Both had built themselves into something impressive and load-bearing and were secretly quietly exhausted from holding it all up alone. "Can I ask you something?" Amelia said one evening, weeks in. They were on the phone. It was late. Emma was asleep. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Ask." "Your wife. What was she like?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Not because it hurt to talk about it did, but he'd made his peace with the hurt, but because most people didn't ask. Most people were afraid to. They tiptoed around it like it was a wound that would open if you looked at it directly. "Her name was Grace," he said. "That's a beautiful name. It fit her. She laughed at everything. She thought the whole world was funny. I'm a serious guy, you've noticed I do serious for a living, and she'd puncture it. She'd make a joke at the exact moment I was about to get too heavy about something, and it'd let all the air out, and I could breathe again." He paused. "That's what I miss most, honestly. Not the big things. I miss the way she wouldn't let me take everything so seriously. Since she's been gone, I take everything too seriously. There's nobody to let the air out. Emma doesn't." Emma's 7. Emma is very serious about the things she's serious about. Horses, fairness, whether her socks match. He laughed softly. She's a lot like me, actually, which worries me. She needs somebody to teach her how to laugh at things. That was supposed to be Grace's job. Amelia was quiet on the other end of the line. You do it, she said finally. Do what? Let the air out. You did it to me the first night. Preston's about to say something horrible. The whole table's about to turn ugly, and you didn't get heavy about it. You made a joke about burning toast. You let the air out. A pause. Maybe you learned it from her. Maybe it's in you now. Caleb hadn't thought of it that way. He sat with it. Maybe, he said, and his voice was a little rough. I'm sorry. Did I? No, that was... He cleared his throat. That was a good thing to say. Thank you. I'm not good at this, Amelia said. The comforting thing. I'm good at fixing things. Give me a broken company and I'll fix it in a quarter. But feelings I don't know where the levers are. You just pulled the right one, Caleb said. You just didn't know it was a lever. There was a silence on the line, warm and full. Caleb, she said. Yeah. When do I get to meet her, Emma? And Caleb felt his chest tighten, because that was the real question, wasn't it? That was the line. Coffee and phone calls and terrible pancakes, those were about him. But Emma was the whole world. Emma had already lost one mother. Caleb had promised himself in the hardest days after Grace that he would never let anyone near his daughter who might teach her that love was a thing that left. That's a big one, he said carefully. I know it is. That's why I'm asking instead of just... She stopped. I would never want to just show up in her life like I'm entitled to it. She lost her mom. I would never try to be that. Amelia took a breath. I want to know the whole of you, Caleb. And she's the biggest part. She's the best part. I can hear it every time you say her name. And if this is going to be, then I need to know if she and I... She gave up on the sentence. I'm making a mess of this. You're not. I am. I close billion-dollar deals, and I can't ask a man if I can meet his kid. That's because the deals don't matter, and this does, Caleb said. You're nervous because it's real. That's a good sign. If you were smooth about it, I'd be worried. So is that a yes? Caleb closed his eyes. He thought about Grace. He thought about the promise he'd made in the dark. And then he thought about the woman on the other end of the phone, the one who'd been so terrified of doing it wrong that she'd ask permission to even try the one who'd said, I would never try to be that, about the one thing she could have used to reel him in completely. A woman working an angle would have pushed to meet Emma. A woman who understood would have been afraid to. Amelia was afraid. Saturday, Caleb said. There's a thing at Emma's school. A fair. Rides cotton candy the works. It's loud and it's chaos, and there's about 400 screaming kids. He paused. It's the perfect place to meet her, because there's no pressure. You're just a friend of mine who came to the fair. That's all she needs to know for now. No labels, no big talk. You just come and you see her and she sees you and we let it be whatever it's gonna be. Saturday, Amelia repeated, and Caleb could hear the emotion she was trying to keep out of her voice. What if she doesn't like me? Then she doesn't like you, and we figure it out. That's not comforting. I told you I don't lie to you. Caleb's voice gentled. But for what it's worth, she's gonna like you. You know how I know. How? Because you're scared she won't. The people who should be scared never are, and the people who'd be great at it are always terrified. Emma's got a radar for who's real. Kids do. You're real. She'll see it. Amelia let out a shaky breath. Okay, she said. Okay. Saturday. What do? I bring something. Is there I don't know the rules. What do you bring for a 7-year-old you're desperate to have like you? Nothing, Caleb said firmly. You bring nothing. If you show up with a present, she'll know something's up. You show up empty-handed, and you let her win at the ring toss, and you're set for life. Let her win. Let her win. But make it look hard. Kids can tell when you throw it. Noted, Amelia said, and Caleb could hear that she was writing it down, actually writing it down, the CEO of a technology company, taking notes on how to lose a ring toss convincingly, and it was so absurd and so tender that he had to press his hand over his mouth to keep from laughing out loud and waking Emma. Saturday came gray and threatening rain, and Caleb stood in the middle of the school fair with Emma's hand in his and his heart going like a drum watching the parking lot. "Daddy, you're squeezing," Emma said. "Sorry, Bug. Why are you being weird?" "I'm not being weird. You're being so weird. You keep looking at the parking lot. Are we waiting for someone?" "A friend of mine's coming. Her name's Amelia." Emma considered this with the grave seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Is she nice?" "Very nice. Nicer than Mr. Bell." "Different nice." "Does she like horses?" "I don't know. You'll have to ask her." And then Amelia was there, walking across the field toward them, and Caleb watched her do the thing again, the hesitation, the scan, the bracing. Except this time, it wasn't the room she was scanning. It was Emma. She was scanning the face of a 7-year-old girl, and she was more scared of that small face than she'd ever been of any boardroom, and Caleb's whole chest ached watching it. "Hi," Amelia said, and stopped a careful, respectful distance away. She didn't crowd. She didn't do the thing adults did where they swooped down into a kid's space and demanded to be adored. She just stood there. "You must be Emma. I'm Amelia. I'm a friend of your dad's." Emma looked up at her, looked her up and down with that unnerving, unblinking honesty children have. Caleb held his breath. "You're pretty," Emma announced. Amelia blinked. "Oh, I thank you. You have nice hair. Mine won't do anything. Dad tries to braid it, but he's bad at it." "I heard," Amelia said gravely. "The toast situation and the braiding situation. He's very honest about his weaknesses." Emma giggled. The toast thing was apparently a known family shame, and Caleb felt something in his chest come untied. "Do you like horses?" Emma demanded. "I don't know very much about horses," Amelia admitted. "But I would like to. Would you teach me?" And that was it. That was the whole thing. Emma, who had been ready to be suspicious, who had every right to be, took one look at this large, kind woman, who admitted she was bad at horses, and wanted to learn, and decided with the swift total conviction of the young that Amelia was hers now. "Okay," Emma said, taking her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "There's a pony. A real one. You have to see it. Dad, we're going to see the pony." "Go see the pony," Caleb managed, and he stood in the middle of the school fair and watched his daughter tow a billionaire across the field toward a rented pony, both of them talking a mile a minute, and he had to turn away and pretend to look at something else for a minute because his eyes had gone hot, and he did not want either of them to see. He watched them all afternoon. He watched Amelia lose the ring toss badly convincingly exactly as instructed, and he watched Emma's face light up like a struck match when she won. He watched Amelia listen to Emma explain the entire complicated politics of the second-grade class, every name, every feud, and he watched her take it as seriously as she'd take a briefing from her board. He watched her get cotton candy in her hair and not care. He watched her let Emma be the expert on horses on the fair, on everything deferring to a 7-year-old's authority with total sincerity. And late in the afternoon, when the rain finally came and everyone scrambled for cover, under the big tent, Caleb watched Emma tired, now wrung out from the day, climb up next to Amelia on the bench, and without any fuss, without asking, lean her head against Amelia's arm and close her eyes. Amelia went completely still. Caleb watched her look down at the small head against her arm. Watched her face do about 6 different things at once. Watched her lift her hand slow and uncertain, and rest it very gently on Emma's back, like she was afraid the girl would startle and pull away. Emma didn't pull away. Emma, half asleep, burrowed in closer, and Amelia Whitaker, who commanded 9,000 employees, who had built an empire, who had learned in 35 years never to let anyone see her cry, sat under a leaking tent at a grade school fair, with a stranger's sleeping child against her side, and cried without making a sound. Tears just running down her face while she held perfectly still so she wouldn't wake the girl. Caleb came and sat on her other side. "You okay?" he said quietly. "No," Amelia whispered, not taking her eyes off Emma. "I am not remotely okay. I have never been less okay in my life." "That good, huh?" A wet laugh. "Caleb, she just put her head down, like it was nothing, like I'm safe. Nobody thinks people think I'm a lot of things, but nobody has ever just assumed I was a safe place to fall asleep." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know I wanted that. I didn't know that was a thing you could want." "Yeah," Caleb said. "It sneaks up on you." They sat there under the tent while the rain came down the three of them, and nobody said anything for a long time, and nobody needed to. That night, after Emma was in bed, after she'd made Caleb promise that Amelia could come to the next fair too, and the one after that, and could maybe come to her birthday, which wasn't for 5 months, but you had to plan these things. Caleb walked Amelia out to her car, which she'd driven herself. This time, no driver. A small, ordinary car she kept for the days she wanted to be a person instead of a title. "I need to tell you something," Amelia said, leaning against the car door. "And I need you to let me say the whole thing before you respond." "Okay. I'm scared," she said. "I've been scared since the diner. Not of you, of me, of what I'll do." She looked at the ground. "Every good thing in my life, I found a way to protect it to death. I get something I care about, and I get so afraid of losing it that I start managing it, controlling it, and I squeeze it until it's gone. And then I tell myself I was right to be afraid because, look, it's gone." She looked up at him. "I can feel myself wanting to do that with you. With this. With her. I looked at that little girl asleep on my arm today, and part of me, this loud, awful part, said, Don't let yourself want this. You'll ruin it. You ruin everything you want." "Amelia, you said you'd let me finish." "Sorry." She took a breath. "So I need you to know that it's in me, that instinct. And I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it every day. But I want you to know it's there because at some point it's going to win around. At some point I'm going to try to push you away to protect you, or protect myself, or protect Emma. And I'm going to dress it up as being noble, but it'll just be fear." She met his eyes. "So when that day comes, I need you to know that it's not about you. It's the old wound. And I need you to—" Her voice wavered. "I don't know what I need you to do. Not give up on me the first time, maybe. That's a lot to ask. That's probably too much to ask." Caleb was quiet for a moment. The porch light buzzed. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. "Can I respond now?" "Yes, I'm a SEAL," Caleb said. "You know what the whole job is when you strip away all the movies and the nonsense? It's not the shooting. It's not the jumping out of planes. The whole job is this. You don't quit. You get cold. You don't quit. You get tired. You don't quit. It goes wrong. Everything goes wrong. The plan's in pieces, and you're hurt, and it's dark, and you want to lie down and stop, and you don't quit. That's the entire thing. That's what they spent all those years teaching me. How to not quit when quitting is the reasonable thing to do." He looked at her. "So you're telling me that someday you're going to push me away, and you want to know if I'll give up. And I'm telling you, you picked the one guy in America who is professionally catastrophically bad at giving up. It's my whole personality. Ask my daughter. Ask my instructors. Ask the Navy. I do not quit. It's a disease. I told you I have a disease about being on time. This is the other one." Amelia laughed, and it broke halfway into something that wasn't a laugh. "That's not a healthy way to run a relationship, you know," she said. "Sheer refusal to quit." "Probably not. We'll figure out the healthy version later. For now, you get the SEAL version. When you push, I don't fall over. That's the deal. I might push hard. I've been pushed by worse than you, and I mean that as the highest compliment a man can pay a woman." She laughed again, really this time, wiping her eyes. "You are the strangest, kindest man I have ever met." "I get that a lot. Well, I get the strange part a lot." She reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd done it, the first time either of them had crossed that particular line, and Caleb felt how cold her fingers were, how they trembled slightly. this powerful woman's hand shaking in his, because holding it meant more to her than any deal she'd ever signed. "I told myself in this car after that first dinner that I'd never see you again," she said. "Did you know that I decided it? It was safer. I had the whole speech ready for Sarah about how you were lovely, but it wasn't going to work." "What changed your mind?" "You paid the check," Amelia said. "You put down that one card and you didn't look at the total, and I knew exactly what that cost you, and I knew you knew and you did it anyway. And I thought—" Her voice dropped. "I thought nobody has ever spent something they couldn't afford on me. Everyone spends what's easy. And you spent something that hurt. On me. On a stranger who'd been humiliated in front of you. And I sat in that car, and I thought I am in so much trouble." Caleb squeezed her cold hand in his warm one. "You want to know the truth about that check?" he said. "Tell me a truth. I moved money around for a week to cover it. Emma needed new shoes, and I made the old ones last another month." He said it plainly, no drama, no fishing. "And I would do it again tomorrow. Not because I'm noble. Because when I watched you walk into that room and take everything they threw at you and keep your chin up, I would have set fire to my whole bank account to make one thing in that night go right for you. That's not an angle, Amelia. That's the opposite of an angle. An angle is when you spend to get. I spent to give. There's nothing at the bottom of it. That's the whole floor. There's no trapdoor." Amelia looked at him for a long, long moment, and Caleb watched the last of some old wall come down behind her eyes. Not all the walls. There were years of walls, but a big one, a load-bearing one. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Okay, I believe you. God help me. I believe you completely, and it's the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me, and I'm not going to run. Tonight, anyway. Tonight, I'm not going to run. Tonight's all anybody's got," Caleb said. "You do tonight, and then you wake up and you do tomorrow. Same as not quitting, you just do the next one." She smiled wet and real and unguarded. "Is that a SEAL thing too?" "That's a widower thing," Caleb said quietly. "That's how you get through the first year. You don't think about the whole rest of your life without them. You drown. You just do the next day. And then the next one. And one day, there's a woman at a dinner walking into the room like she's walking into a wind, and you realize you've been doing the next day for 3 years, and you're still here. And maybe there's a reason." Amelia didn't say anything. She just stepped in and put her arms around him there in the dark by her small ordinary car. And Caleb held her, this large, warm, brilliant, frightened woman, and felt her let go finally of some enormous weight she'd been carrying so long, she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her body. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder, "for asking about my day." "You're gonna have to stop thanking me for that." "Never," she said. "I'm never going to stop. It's the reason for all of it. It's the whole reason." He walked her to her car door, and out of pure habit reached to open it for her, and she caught his hand and laughed and let him, and she drove off into the dark, and Caleb stood in his driveway and watched her taillights until they turned the corner and were gone. Inside, Emma called down sleepily from her room. "Daddy, did Amelia go home?" "She went home, Bug. Go to sleep." "Is she coming back?" Caleb stood at the bottom of the stairs. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, she's coming back." "Good," Emma said, already half asleep. "I like her. She's bad at the ring toss, but she tries really hard." Caleb smiled in the dark. "Yeah," he said softly. "She does. She tries harder than anybody I've ever met." He turned off the porch light and locked the door and stood for a moment in the quiet house that hadn't felt empty in weeks now, and he thought about how a thing could start with a thrown glass and a table full of cruel people and turn somehow into this, a sleeping daughter, a woman driving home who was already planning to come back, a life reassembling itself out of pieces he'd been sure were broken past repair. He didn't know yet how right Amelia had been about the fear. He didn't know that the loud, awful part of her was going to win around and soon, and that it was going to test every ounce of that professional catastrophic inability to quit. He only knew that tonight, right now in this house, there were 3 people who had found each other against every reasonable odd, and that for the first time in a very long time, The next day was something he was looking forward to, instead of something he had to survive. He went upstairs. He checked on Emma, pulled her blanket up, moved the stuffed horse she'd fallen asleep clutching so it wouldn't fall. And then he went to bed, and he did not lie awake, and he did not dream of the two officers with their hats in their hands. For the first time in 3 years, he slept the whole night through. The round Amelia had warned him about came on a Thursday, and it came the way she'd said it would, dressed up as something noble. It started with a phone call at 6 a.m. Caleb was making Emma's lunch when his phone buzzed, and it was Amelia, and her voice was wrong. Flat. The professional voice. The one he'd hated at the dinner and hadn't heard from her in weeks. "Have you seen it?" she said. "Seen what?" "It's 6 in the morning. I've seen the inside of a peanut butter jar. There's an article." A pause. "You need to see the article. I'll wait." Caleb set down the knife. He pulled up the browser on his phone with the hand that wasn't holding it, and there it was. Second result, a business and culture site he'd vaguely heard of, and the headline hit him like cold water. Tech billionaire's mystery man who is the Navy hero, cashing in on Amelia Whitaker. "Okay," Caleb said slowly. "I see it. Read it." "I'm reading it." He read it. It was worse than the headline. It had his name. It had a photo, a real one from the school fair. The three of them, someone had taken it and sold it, or posted it, and it had traveled. It had Emma's face blurred, thank God, but there. And the article had spun the whole thing into something ugly and unrecognizable. The widowed sailor on a government salary who'd conveniently appeared at a private dinner and attached himself to one of the richest women in the country. It quoted an unnamed source close to the situation who said Caleb had made a scene at the dinner to get Amelia's attention. It noted with poisoned politeness that he had insisted on paying the bill, turning the one thing he'd been proudest of into evidence of a down payment on a longer game. It used the word opportunist twice. It asked in the arch tone these things always use what a decorated war hero could possibly see in Amelia Whitaker besides her bank account. That last part was the part that told Caleb everything. Because buried in the question was the assumption, the ugly, unspoken, universal assumption that no man could genuinely want her. That her body made her unlovable, and therefore any love directed at her had to be a lie, a transaction, an angle. The whole article was built on that foundation, and it never said it out loud because it didn't have to. Everyone reading it already agreed. Caleb felt something cold and familiar move through him. The thing that used to move through him before a mission. The stillness. "Caleb," Amelia said. "Are you there?" "I'm here." "Say something." "Who's the unnamed source?" "What?" "The source close to the situation. Who said I made a scene to get your attention?" "Who talks like that?" "That's not a stranger. That's somebody who was at the dinner." Caleb's voice was very calm. "It's Preston." A silence on the line. "You don't know that," Amelia said. "I know exactly that. He humiliated you, and I made him look like a fool in front of everyone, and men like that don't forget it. This is him. This is a small man getting even." Caleb picked the knife back up, went back to the sandwich because Emma still had to eat. The world didn't stop for a hit piece. "It doesn't matter, though. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter, Caleb. It has your name. It has—" Her voice broke slightly. "It has Emma. It has her at a school fair. That's my fault. That happened because of me. Because you were standing next to me." Her face is blurred. This time. "This is how it starts. This is exactly how it starts, and I know how it goes. I've watched it happen to people around me for 15 years. First it's blurred, then it's a follow-up. Then it's a photographer outside the school." Her voice was climbing now, and Caleb could hear it, could hear the old wound taking over the fear, putting on its noble costume. "Your daughter is going to have photographers outside her school because of me. Because you had the bad luck to be kind to me at a dinner." "Amelia." "I have a board meeting at 9, she said, and the flat voice was back worse now, the shutter's coming down. "My head of comms has already called twice. There are analysts asking questions. This US, it's a liability now. It's a thing that has to be managed. Don't do that. Do what? That. What you're doing. You warned me about it, and now you're doing it, and you don't even hear yourself. Caleb kept his voice gentle, but he didn't back off. You're turning me into a liability. A thing to be managed. 12 hours ago, I was the man whose daughter fell asleep on your arm, and now I'm a PR problem. That's the fear talking, Amelia. That's the round you told me about. The silence on the line was long and terrible. I have to go, Amelia said. I have the board at 9. Amelia. I'll call you after. She didn't call him after. She didn't call him that day at all. Caleb texted her once at noon. You okay? And got nothing. He texted again at 3. Whatever they said in that room, remember what's real, and got nothing. He made himself not text a third time because a third time was pleading, and he'd learned a long time ago that you don't chase somebody who's running scared. You hold your ground so they know where to find you when they stop. But it was hard. God, it was hard. Because he could feel her out there deciding things about his life without him exactly like she'd done in there. And there was a particular helplessness in it that Caleb had never been good with. The helplessness of watching someone you care about hurt themselves to protect you from a hurt that wasn't even real. Emma noticed, of course. Emma noticed everything. You're being weird again, she said at dinner. The parking lot weird. I'm okay, Bug. Is it Amelia? Did she do something? Caleb looked at his daughter across the table. He'd made a rule after Grace that he would never lie to Emma about the big things. She'd had enough taken from her. She wasn't going to have the truth taken too. Amelia's scared of something, he said carefully. And when she gets scared, she pushes people away. To protect them. Even when they don't need protecting. Emma frowned, chewing this over along with her macaroni. That's dumb, she concluded. It's a little dumb, Caleb agreed. But she learned it a long time ago when some people were really mean to her, and it's hard to unlearn something like that. Are you gonna unscare her? I'm gonna try. You should, Emma said with the total certainty of the young. Because she likes us, I could tell. When you like someone, you shouldn't push them away, you should let them come to the fair. She said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, which Caleb thought it was. It was the simplest thing in the world, and the adults had made it complicated. 2 more days passed. 2 days of silence, and then on the 3rd day it stopped being silence and became something worse. Because on the 3rd day Amelia's head of communications called Caleb directly. Mr. Hayes, the woman said, smooth as glass. My name is Diane Cho. I'm with Ms. Whitaker's office. Do you have a moment? Where's Amelia? Ms. Whitaker has asked me to reach out on her behalf regarding the recent media attention. Caleb closed his eyes. On her behalf. She'd sent a proxy. She'd been too much of a coward. No, that wasn't fair. Too scared, too deep in the fear to say it herself. So she'd sent a professional to do the cutting. Go ahead, Caleb said. Ms. Whitaker feels, given the exposure this situation has created for your family, particularly your daughter, that it would be in everyone's best interest to step back from any public association. She wants me to convey that this is in no way a reflection of her personal regard for you. Quite the opposite. It's precisely because of that regard that she— Stop, Caleb said. Diane, you seem like a person who's good at her job, and I don't want to be rude to you because none of this is your fault. But I'm not going to take this call from you. This isn't a message that gets delivered by a spokesperson. If she wants to end it, she can say it to my face, and if she can't say it to my face, then she doesn't actually want to end it. She just wants to be safe, and I'm not going to help her hide from that. So thank you, I mean that, but no. There was a pause on the line, and then Diane Cho said in a slightly different voice, a human one off script, for what it's worth. Mr. Hayes, I've worked for her for 6 years. I've never seen her like this over anyone. She's not doing this because she doesn't care. I know why she's doing it, Caleb said. Tell her I know why. Tell her I said the fear's lying to her. And tell her— He stopped. Tell her I'm not going anywhere. Tell her that exactly. Word for word. I'm not going anywhere. He hung up. And then he did the hardest thing. The thing that went against every instinct that was screaming at him to get in the truck and drive to her building and pound on the door. He waited. He held his ground. Because you cannot force somebody out of fear. You can only stand where they can find you and still be there when they finally turn around. He held his ground for one more day. And then on the fourth night at nearly 11, there was a knock at his door. Caleb opened it, and Amelia was standing on his porch in the cold. No coat, no driver, her small ordinary car, crooked in the driveway like she'd stopped it any way it landed. Her face was a wreck. She'd been crying, was still crying, mascara gone, all the armor gone, everything gone. She looked like she'd driven straight through something to get there. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "I sent Diane," Amelia said finally. Her voice was shredded. I used a spokesperson to end things with you. Because I was such a coward, I couldn't even..." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Who does that? What kind of person does that to someone who paid a check he couldn't afford?" "A scared one," Caleb said quietly. "Don't," she said. "Don't be kind about it. Be angry. Please be angry. I need you to be angry, because if you're kind about it, I'm going to..." Her voice cracked completely. "I did the thing. I did the exact thing I told you I'd do. I got scared and I dressed it up as protecting you and Emma, and I told myself I was being noble. I told myself I was falling on a grenade for you, and it was a lie. It was just fear. She was sobbing now. "I was just protecting myself, same as always. I saw a chance to lose you slowly on my terms instead of fast on the world's, and I took it. Because that's what I do. I ruin the thing before it can ruin me." Caleb stepped out onto the porch. He didn't touch her yet. He just stood close so she could feel he was there. "Are you done?" he said. "What? With the speech? The one where you tell me what a monster you are. Are you done, or is there more? Because I want to make sure you get it all out before I respond." A wet, startled laugh broke through the sobbing. There's probably more. There's a whole lifetime of more." "Okay, get it out." "I pushed you away with a phone call from my head of comms," Amelia said, "and now that the dam was broken, it all came. And I sat in board meetings and let people call the best thing that ever happened to me a situation and a liability. And I nodded along. I let them. And the whole time, there was a part of me screaming that Emma fell asleep on my arm. Emma fell asleep on my arm. And I'm sitting here letting them turn it into a stock problem. And I hated myself. I hated every second. And I still didn't stop, because stopping meant admitting I wanted it. And wanting it means I can lose it, and I would rather throw a thing away than have it taken from me. That's who you're dealing with, Caleb. That's the whole broken thing. I'm 35 years old, and I would rather break my own heart than let someone else do it, because at least when I do it, I'm in control." She was gasping now. "And I got in the car tonight to drive to your house and tell you it was really over, make it official, look you in the eye and do the cruel thing properly. And I got halfway here, and I realized I wasn't driving to end it. I was driving to you. My body was driving to you while my mouth was rehearsing goodbye. And I had to pull over because I couldn't see the road." "And then you kept driving," Caleb said. "And then I kept driving," Amelia whispered. I kept driving here. Because you're the place I drive to now. Somewhere in the last 2 months you became the place I drive to. And I don't know when it happened, and it terrifies me, and I couldn't make myself turn around." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. The porch light buzzed. It was cold, and she had no coat, and she was shaking, and he was pretty sure it wasn't from the cold. "Can I respond now?" "Yes." She wiped her face uselessly. "Yes, please. Say anything. Yell at me. I deserve it." "I'm not going to yell at you," Caleb said. "I told Diane to tell you something. Did she tell you?" Amelia nodded jerkily. "She said you said you're not going anywhere, and that the fear's lying to me." "That's still true," Caleb said. "All of it, every word. It's just as true tonight as it was 4 days ago, and it's gonna be just as true 4 days from now and 4 years from now. That's the part you can't seem to get through your head, so let me say it real slow." He took her cold face in his warm hands, made her look at him. "You keep thinking there's a version of you that's too broken, too scared, too much, too big, too damaged. And you keep waiting for me to find it, hit it, and leave. You've been waiting for it this whole time. And what I'm telling you, what I've been telling you since the sidewalk, is that there's no bottom. You can't fall out of this. There's no floor you drop through where I go, 'Oh, that's the real her, never mind.' You just showed me the worst of it. You sent a spokesperson to break up with a widower. That's about as bad as it gets. And you know what I'm feeling right now." "What?" she breathed. "Relief," Caleb said. "Because you finally showed me the round you warned me about, and it turns out I was right. I didn't fall over. You pushed as hard as you know how to push, you used every weapon you had, you were cruel and cowardly, and you did the worst thing you're capable of, and I'm still standing right here on this porch with your face in my hands. That's not me being a Saint Amelia, that's just true. You pushed, and I didn't move, and now we both know. Now you have proof. The next time the fear tells you I'll leave when I see the real you, you can tell it to shut up because you already showed me, and I already stayed." Amelia broke completely then. She sagged forward into him, and Caleb caught her, held her up, held all of her, this large trembling woman who had spent 4 days trying to set fire to the best thing in her life, and had driven through the dark, unable to finish the job because her own body wouldn't let her. "I'm so sorry," she said into his chest over and over. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." "I know. I sent a spokesperson. I know. It was a really bad move. Genuinely one of the worst breakup strategies I've ever heard of." A hysterical laugh through the sobs. "Don't. I'm serious. A phone call from your head of comms. Emma could come up with something more personal than that, and she's 7. Stop making me laugh. I'm trying to fall apart." "You can do both," Caleb said gently. "Turns out you can do both at the same time. Grace taught me that. You can cry and laugh in the same breath. It's allowed." They stood on the porch for a long time, until Amelia's shaking eased, until the sobs slowed and stopped, until she was just breathing against his chest, spent and quiet. "The article," she said finally. "Emma, the photographers. That part's real, Caleb. That part wasn't the fear. That could actually happen. I could actually bring that down on her." "Okay," Caleb said. "Now we're talking about the real thing instead of the fear thing. Good. Let's talk about it." He pulled back enough to look at her. "You're right. It's a real risk. Being close to you means being close to the spotlight, and Emma's a kid, and I have to protect her. That's true. So here's what we do. We don't hide because hiding tells them they were right, that there's something shameful here to hide. And we don't fight it with anger, because anger's what they want. Anger makes a better story. We do the thing they'll never see coming." "What thing?" "We tell the truth," Caleb said. "The whole boring true thing. Louder than they can tell the lie. You want to know how you kill a story that says a man's only with you for your money. You don't argue with it. You just live so obviously, so completely the opposite of it in public on purpose, that the story dies of embarrassment. You let them see the real thing. They can't compete with the real thing. The real thing is stronger than any lie, it's just quieter, so you have to turn it up." Amelia looked at him. "You want to go public, on purpose, after they just—" "I want to stop letting scared people write our story," Caleb said. "Yours and mine. You've let scared people write your story your whole life. The man who called you successful, like an apology. The room full of Prestons. The board that calls a sleeping child a liability. And I let scared grief write mine for 3 years. I think we're both done letting fear hold the pen. I think it's time we wrote the thing ourselves." Amelia was quiet for a long moment. "That's terrifying," she said. "Yep. Genuinely terrifying. More than the board. More than any of it." "Yep. You do that. For me. Put yourself out there. Put carefully protecting Emma. But you'd stand up in public and let the whole world see you chose me, knowing what they'll say, knowing they'll all be doing the math. wondering what's wrong with you that you'd want. She couldn't finish it. That you'd want her? Caleb finished for her softly. Say the whole thing. That's the thing under all of it, isn't it? That's the thing the article was really saying, the thing everyone's really thinking. What's wrong with him that he'd want her? Amelia's eyes filled again. She nodded, unable to speak. Amelia, Caleb said, look at me. There is nothing wrong with me. And there is nothing wrong with you. The thing that's wrong is a whole world that looked at the best woman I ever met and decided her body was the most important fact about her. That's their sickness. That's not yours. You've been carrying their sickness around for 35 years like it belongs to you, and it doesn't. It's theirs. I want to hand it back to them. In public. I want to stand next to you where everyone can see and hand their sickness right back and say no thank you. I'm keeping her, and you can think whatever you want about that, because I have never in my life been so sure of anything. And Amelia Whitaker, who could stand in front of a board and not blink, who had built an empire and closed 100 deals, stood on a widower's cold porch at 11 at night and looked at him like he'd cracked the whole world open. How are you real? She whispered. How is any of this real? You want the true answer or the nice one? The true one. Always the true one with you. I don't know, Caleb said. I don't know how it's real. 2 months ago, I was making peace with the idea that I'd spend the rest of my life alone raising Emma showing up doing the next day. I'd stopped hoping. Not sad about it exactly, just done. Closed for business. And then Marcus dragged me to a dinner I didn't want to go to, and a woman walked in like she was walking into a wind, and something in me stood up before my brain caught up, and it hasn't sat back down since. He shook his head. I don't know how it's real, I just know it is, and I know I'm not letting a business website and a man like Preston take it from me. Not after everything it took to get here. Not a chance. From inside the house, a small voice called out sleepy and cross. Daddy, why are you outside? It's cold. Who are you talking to? Emma appeared in the doorway, in her horse pajamas, hair everywhere squinting into the porch light. She saw Amelia, and her whole face transformed, sleep forgotten. Amelia, she said, delighted. You came back, I knew you'd come back. Dad said you were scared, but I said you'd come back because you like us. She looked at Amelia's ruined, tear-streaked face with a child's frank concern. Why are you crying? Did someone be mean to you? Was it the mean people again? Amelia made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. She crouched down right there on the porch in the cold to be at Emma's level. Yeah, she said, wiping her face. It was the mean people again. But your dad, her voice wobbled. Your dad stood up to them, like he did at the very first dinner. He stood up to them for me. He's good at that, Emma said proudly. He's a SEAL. He's not scared of mean people. She considered Amelia seriously. You don't have to be scared either. You can just come to the fair. That's what I do when people are mean. I go where the nice people are. Amelia looked up at Caleb and then back at the small, serious face in front of her, and Caleb watched something settle in her. Some last piece clicking into place. Some final wall coming down as a 7-year-old in horse pajamas explained the entire secret of surviving cruel people in one sentence. You go where the nice people are. Okay, Amelia said to Emma, her voice thick. Okay, I'll try. I'll try to go where the nice people are. We're the nice people, Emma clarified in case it wasn't obvious. I know, Amelia said, and she was crying and laughing at once now, doing both at the same time the thing Grace had taught Caleb you were allowed to do. I know you are. You're the nicest people I ever met. Then come inside, Emma said with the impatient logic of the young taking Amelia's hand and pulling. It's cold, and you're sad, and inside there's hot chocolate, and it's warm, and Dad makes it with the little marshmallows. Come on. And Amelia let herself be pulled. Let a 7-year-old lead her out of the cold and into the warm house, into the light toward hot chocolate with little marshmallows. And Caleb stood on the porch one more second and watched them go. The small girl and the frightened, powerful woman, hand in hand, disappearing into his kitchen, and he thought his chest might actually break open from how full it was. Then he followed them in and shut the door on the cold and the dark and the world full of people doing their cruel arithmetic, and locked it and went to make hot chocolate for the two of them the way Grace used to make it for him, with the little marshmallows in the warm, bright kitchen of the house that had not been empty for a long time now, and never would be again. The hot chocolate plan was simple compared to the one they made 3 days later at Amelia's kitchen table, after Emma was asleep at Marcus and Sarah's for the night with Diane Cho on speakerphone and a legal pad between them, covered in Caleb's blocky handwriting. "I want to be clear about what I'm agreeing to," Diane said through the speaker, "because in 6 years I have never once advised a client to do the thing you two are about to do." "Say it anyway," Amelia said. "My advice is to say nothing. Let it die. These stories have a 2-week shelf life. You go quiet, you give them nothing to feed on, and in a month it's gone. That's the professional move. That's what I'd tell any client." "And what happens to the underneath part?" Caleb asked. "The part the article was really about. The part where everybody reading it agreed that nobody could really love her. Does that die in 2 weeks too? Or does that just sink back down and wait for the next time?" There was a silence on the line. "That doesn't die," Diane admitted. "That never dies. That just goes back to sleep." "Then quiet's not good enough," Caleb said. "Quiet lets them keep the thing they believe. I don't want them to forget the story. I want them to be wrong about it, out loud, where it counts." Diane sighed the sigh of a professional watching a client refuse professional advice. "Then here's what I need from you if we're really doing this. No anger. The second either of you sounds angry, you've lost. They want angry. Angry billionaire, angry soldier, that's a story that runs for a month. You have to be the opposite of angry. You have to be so calm and so plain that there's nothing to grab onto. Can you do that?" "He can," Amelia said, looking across the table at Caleb. "He's the calmest person I've ever met." He threw a glass across a restaurant, and it was the calmest thing I've ever seen a person do. "I'm not going to be angry," Caleb said. "There's nothing to be angry about. Angry is for when somebody takes something from you. Nobody's taking anything from me. I have everything I want. You can't be angry when you already won." Diane was quiet a beat. "Okay," she said, and something in her voice had shifted. "Okay. Maybe you two know what you're doing after all. Here's how we set it up." The plan they built was not a press conference. Caleb had refused a press conference too staged, he said too much like a performance. And the whole point was that it wasn't a performance, it was just the truth turned up loud enough to hear. Instead, Amelia was already scheduled to give a keynote the following week at a major industry conference, the kind of thing she did twice a year. A room full of press and investors, and the whole loud world that had spent 2 weeks doing math about her love life. She'd give the talk she was supposed to give about the company, about the future, all of it. And then she'd go off script. "You don't have to do this part," Caleb told her the night before on the phone late, the way so many of their most important conversations happened. "The plan works even if you just stand there. You don't owe them your story." "I know I don't owe them," Amelia said. "That's exactly why I want to give it. For 15 years, I've stood on stages and given them the parts of me that were useful. The numbers, the vision, the confident version. I've never once given them the true part, because the true part felt like a weakness, like blood in the water." She paused. "You know what changed? Emma asked me a question last week, when she stayed over. She asked me if I'd ever wished I was somebody else." Caleb's breath caught. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth. I said more times than I could count, and this 7-year-old looked at me like I'd said something insane, and she said..." Amelia's voice thickened. "She said, I don't think you should, because Dad likes you exactly the way you are. And Caleb, I have paid consultants, therapists, executive coaches, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years to try to make me believe a version of that sentence, and none of it ever landed. And a 7-year-old said it over hot chocolate, and it went straight through me like it was nothing." She took a shaky breath. "So tomorrow I'm going to stand on that stage, and I'm going to say the true part. Not for them, for her. So that when she grows up in whatever world we're building, there's a recording somewhere of a woman like her standing in front of everyone and not apologizing for 1 inch of herself. That's who I'm doing it for." Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. When he did, his voice was rough. "Grace would have liked you," he said. "I don't say that lightly. She'd have liked you a lot." "You've never said that before?" "I've never been sure before. I'm sure now." The next day, Amelia gave her keynote. Caleb watched it from the wings off to the side, where the audience couldn't see him. Emma's hand in his, because Emma had insisted, had absolutely refused to be left at home for this. And Caleb had decided that some things a daughter should see, and a woman she loved standing up for herself in front of the world was one of them. They'd worked it out with Diane. Emma would stay in the wings, safe unphotographed, but she'd be there. She'd see it. The talk went the way Amelia's talks always went. Sharp, clear, commanding the whole room, leaning toward her, the way that first dinner table had leaned toward her, wanting what she knew. She walked them through the year, the strategy, the numbers. And Caleb watched the version of her that the world was allowed to see, the polished, load-bearing version, and he squeezed Emma's hand and waited. Then Amelia reached the end of her prepared remarks, and she paused, and she set down the little clicker she'd been using to advance her slides, and she stepped out from behind the podium to the front of the stage where there was nothing between her and the room. "I want to say one more thing," she said, "and it isn't about the company." The room shifted. Caleb felt the whole energy of it change, the reporters sitting up, the phones coming out, the sudden electric attention of people who could smell that something unplanned was about to happen. "Some of you have read a story about me recently," Amelia said. Her voice was perfectly calm. "About a man in my life. It suggested that he couldn't really care about me and that he must be after my money because—" She paused, and Caleb watched her decide to say the whole thing. "Because look at me." That was the real argument. It didn't say it in those words. It didn't have to. The argument was, look at her. What else could he possibly want? The room was dead silent now. Nobody had ever heard Amelia Whitaker talk like this. Nobody had ever heard her acknowledge out loud on a stage the thing that everybody thought and nobody said. "I've spent most of my life," she went on, "being very, very good at a lot of things, specifically, so that I would never have to talk about the thing I was standing in front of you being right now. I built a company, partly so that when people looked at me, they'd have to look at what I'd made instead of at me. I made myself impressive so I could stay hidden, and it worked. For 15 years it worked." She took a breath. "The man in that story asked me how my day was. That's it. That's the whole scandal. The first time we met before he knew what I did or what I had, he looked at me across a table where people were being unkind, and he asked me how my day was, and he meant it. And I have been in rooms with the most powerful people in this industry for 15 years, and not one of them had ever asked me that and meant it. So when a business website tells you that no one could really want me, that any love pointed at a woman who looks like me has to be a con, I want to tell you what I've learned. That website isn't describing him. It's describing itself. It's describing all of us, actually, and the arithmetic we do on each other without even noticing we're doing it. He's not the one with something wrong with him for wanting me. We're the ones with something wrong with us for being surprised that anyone would." She let that sit. The room didn't make a sound. "I have a daughter in my life now," Amelia said, and Caleb felt Emma go very still beside him. "Not my own. She belongs to that man they called an opportunist. She's 7. And a few weeks ago she asked me if I'd ever wished I was someone else, and I told her the truth, which is that I've wished it more times than I could count. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and she told me I shouldn't, because her father likes me exactly the way I am." Amelia's voice held steady, but only just. "I'm not going to tell you her name. I'm not going to show you her face. She's a child, and she's not part of this. But I'm telling you she exists because I want you to understand what these stories cost. When you write that a man couldn't possibly love a woman who looks like me, you're not just insulting me. You're teaching every little girl who reads it, and every little girl watching one of us walk into a room and flinch, that there's a limit on who gets to be loved, and that the limit has to do with the size of her body. I'm not willing to teach her that. So I'm standing here saying the opposite out loud where it's recorded so that someday she can find it. There is no limit. There was never a limit. The limit was always just other people's fear wearing a suit and calling itself common sense. She stepped back. She picked up her clicker. "Thank you for your time," she said in exactly the same calm voice she'd started with. "That's all I had. I hope the rest of the conference is useful to you." And she walked off the stage into the wings, into the exact spot where Caleb and Emma were waiting. And the room behind her erupted, not into the hostile roar Diane had feared, but into something none of them had expected. A sound that started as scattered clapping and built and became a standing ovation. A whole room full of the loud arithmetic-doing world on its feet. Because even people who do cruel math can recognize the truth when someone finally says it plainly enough. But Amelia didn't hear the ovation. Amelia had already dropped to her knees in the wings because Emma had let go of Caleb's hand and run straight into her, and Amelia had caught her, and the two of them were holding on to each other while the applause thundered on the other side of the curtain unheard. "You said it," Emma was saying into her shoulder. "You said the true thing, in front of everybody." "I said the true thing," Amelia agreed, her voice breaking. "Because you told me to. Because you told me I shouldn't wish I was someone else. So I stopped." Caleb crouched down beside them, put his arms around both of them. This family that had assembled itself out of a thrown glass and a diner and a cold porch and hot chocolate with little marshmallows, and for a moment none of them said anything, because there wasn't anything left that needed saying. The story died the way Caleb had promised it would not, with a fight, but with an ovation. You cannot run a piece about a man who's only in it for the money when the woman he loves has just stood on a stage and made a room full of hardened reporters cry. The angle collapsed under the weight of the obvious truth. Within a week, the same outlets that had run the hit piece were running the video of the keynote instead, because the video got more clicks, because the truth, it turned out, was a better story than the lie had ever been. Diane called it the most successful crisis response I've ever been embarrassed to have advised against. Preston, and it had been Preston. Caleb had been right, was never named publicly. But word got around the industry the way word does, and doors that had been open to him started quietly to close, and that was punishment enough, and neither Caleb nor Amelia ever spent one more minute thinking about him. What Caleb thought about in the weeks after was something quieter. He thought about the way the whole thing had changed Amelia, not overnight, not like a magic spell, but in the slow, real way that things actually change. She still had the fear. She told him so honestly, the way she told him everything now. But she'd stopped letting it drive. "I caught myself doing it again yesterday," she told him one evening. They were on her couch. Emma was asleep down the hall, in what had quietly become Emma's room, with Emma's horse posters and Emma's stuffed animals, because the three of them had stopped pretending they were three separate lives a while ago. The fear thing. There was a board issue, and my first instinct was to handle it alone, not tell you, protect you from the stress of it. Old reflex. Manage everything, carry it silently. Don't let anyone see the weight. "What did you do?" "I told you about it," Amelia said, and she smiled, a little amazed at herself. "That's the whole story. That's the big triumph. I noticed the reflex, and then I just told you about the board thing over dinner, like a normal person. And you listened, and you said something smart about it, and it got easier because I wasn't carrying it alone. And I sat there afterward thinking, that's it. That's all it was. All those years I was carrying everything alone, and the entire time the answer was just, tell someone who loves you." She shook her head. "Nobody ever told me that was allowed." "Grace used to say that carrying things alone isn't strength," Caleb said. "She said it just feels like strength because it hurts, and we're trained to think anything that hurts must be making us stronger. But sometimes pain's just pain. Sometimes carrying it alone is just being alone, with a heavy thing." "I wish I'd met her," Amelia said softly. It was the kind of thing that would have been strange to say about a man's late wife once, but it wasn't strange between them anymore. Grace was part of the family too, in her way. Emma talked about her. Caleb talked about her. And Amelia had made a quiet decision early on that she would never compete with a ghost, never try to erase her, but would simply add a chair to the table. "She'd have talked your ear off," Caleb said. She'd have made you laugh so hard you'd have forgotten to be scared of anything. That's the thing she was best at, making the scary stuff smaller by refusing to treat it as big. Emma does that too. Have you noticed? I've noticed. She did it to me tonight before bed. I was tucking her in, and I was a little off thinking about the board thing before I decided to tell you. And she looked at me and said, "You have your worried face," and I said I was a little worried, and she said, Amelia laughed. She said, "Did you try telling Dad? He's good at worried stuff. 7 years old. She's already smarter about all this than I've managed to be in 35 years. She learned it from Grace," Caleb said. "And then Grace left, and she kept it, and now she's teaching it to you. That's—" His voice caught. "I don't have words for what that is. My wife taught my daughter how to make heavy things lighter, and my daughter's teaching it to the woman I—" He stopped. Amelia went still. "The woman you— What?" Caleb looked at her. He hadn't planned to say it. He'd thought about it for weeks, thought about the right moment, the right way, and now, here it was unplanned over a board issue and a memory of Grace, which was exactly he realized how it should be. Not staged. Just true. "The woman I love," he said. That's the end of the sentence. The woman I love. I've been not saying it for a while now because I wanted it to be. I don't know. I wanted it to be a whole thing, a moment. And then I just realized I've been in love with you probably since a sidewalk 2 months ago, and I've been sitting here not saying it because I was scared. And that's your move. That's your whole move, being scared of the good thing. I've been doing your thing. So. He took her hand. I love you. There. I said it plain, which is the only way I know how to say anything to you. I love you. And I'm not going anywhere, which you already knew. And I love you, which maybe you didn't. Amelia's eyes had filled. I knew, she whispered. I knew, and I was doing the exact same thing you were. Waiting for the moment, being scared, not saying it. She laughed, wet and helpless. We're a disaster. We're 2 grown adults who raise children and companies and can't say 4 words. So say them. I love you, Amelia said. God, I love you. I've loved you since you paid a check you couldn't afford and didn't look at the total. I love you, and I keep waiting to find out it's not real. And it keeps being real every single day. It's still real, and I've finally stopped waiting for it to stop. She pressed his hand to her face. I love you. That wasn't so hard. Why was that so hard for so long? Because the things that matter are always the hard ones to say, Caleb said. The stuff that doesn't matter comes out easy. It's the load-bearing sentences that stick in your throat. They sat there on the couch holding on to each other in the quiet apartment, with a sleeping child down the hall, and a 4th chair pulled up for a ghost who'd taught them both in her way how to get here. And Caleb thought about how a year ago he'd been sure his heart was a thing that had already done all the beating it was going to do for anyone but Emma. And how wrong he'd been, and how grateful he was to have been so completely catastrophically wrong. Can I ask you something? Amelia said after a while, her head on his shoulder. Always. When you threw that glass at the dinner, the very first night. She tilted her head to look up at him. You said you missed him on purpose. 3 inches wide. Why'd you throw it at all if you weren't going to hit him? Why not just say something? Caleb thought about it. It was a fair question. He'd never fully answered it even to himself. Because words were not going to reach him, he said finally. A man like Preston, you can't argue him out of what he is. But I could make the whole room stop. I could make it so that for 10 seconds, nobody in that place was doing math about you. Everybody was just frozen, paying attention. And in those 10 seconds, you weren't the thing they were whispering about anymore. You were just a person somebody had stood up for. He shrugged. I couldn't fix the whole world in one dinner. But I could buy you 10 seconds of it being different. So I did. That's all the glass was. 10 seconds where you got to be a person instead of a punchline. Amelia was quiet for a long time. 10 seconds, she said softly. 10 seconds. You bought me 10 seconds with a champagne glass, and I've spent the 2 months since then slowly realizing you'd buy me the rest of my life if I let you. She turned her face into his shoulder. I'm going to let you. she said. "I've decided. I'm going to let you buy me the whole rest of it. And I'm going to buy you yours right back. That's the deal. That's the only deal I've ever made that I'm completely sure about." Down the hall, faint and sleepy, Emma's voice drifted out. "Are you guys talking about feelings? I can hear the feelings voice." Caleb and Amelia both laughed. "Go to sleep, Bug," Caleb called. "Is Amelia staying?" Caleb looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at Caleb. And something passed between them, easy and settled and sure, the question and the answer arriving at the same time. "Yeah, Bug," Caleb called back. "Amelia's staying." "Good," came the small, satisfied voice from down the hall. "Then can she make pancakes in the morning? Dad burns them, but she's good at everything." Amelia pressed her face into Caleb's shoulder to muffle the sound she made. Half laughter and half something deeper, and Caleb wrapped both arms around her and held her. While down the hall, his daughter drifted back to sleep in a house that had assembled itself against every reasonable odd into exactly the family he'd stopped believing he'd ever have again. "I can't make pancakes," Amelia whispered. "I've never made a pancake in my life. I have people who—" She stopped. "I'm going to learn how to make pancakes. Tonight. I'm going to look it up right now because that child thinks I'm good at everything, and I refuse to let the first thing she finds out I can't do be pancakes. It's 11 at night. I run a technology company. I'll figure out pancakes." She was already reaching for her phone, and Caleb was already laughing. And this ordinary, ridiculous middle-of-the-night moment, a billionaire frantically researching pancake recipes so as not to disappoint a 7-year-old. This was the thing. Not the keynote, not the ovation, not the story dying. This. The small, warm nothing of it. The two of them on a couch and a kid down the hall and pancakes in the morning. This was what all of it had been for. The pancakes, as it turned out, were terrible. Amelia had stayed up past midnight watching videos, and she'd bought the ingredients the next morning before Emma woke, and she'd stood at Caleb's stove with the fierce concentration she usually reserved for hostile board members, and she'd produced a stack of pancakes that were somehow both burned and raw, a technical achievement Caleb hadn't known was possible. Emma took one bite, chewed thoughtfully, and delivered her verdict with the brutal honesty of the young. "These are worse than Dad's." Amelia's face fell. I followed They're way worse," Emma confirmed, reaching for the syrup as if drowning them might help. "But that's okay. You tried really hard. You always try really hard. That's the best thing about you." And Caleb watched Amelia Whitaker, who had stood on a stage a week earlier and made a room full of reporters weep, who ran a company worth more than some countries, get more genuinely, wordlessly moved by a 7-year-old, calling her bad pancakes a good effort, than by anything the business world had ever handed her. She had to turn around and pretend to fuss with the stove for a second. Caleb pretended not to notice. That was one of the small mercies they'd learned to give each other, the courtesy of pretending not to see the crying when the crying was the good kind. "I'll get better," Amelia told Emma when she'd composed herself. "I know," Emma said, unconcerned, syrup everywhere. "You get better at everything. You didn't even know how to lose the ring toss, and now you're really good at it." Caleb choked on his coffee. "She knows," he managed. "Emma, you knew about the ring toss." "Dad?" Emma gave him the withering look of a child astonished by adult stupidity. "I always knew. She throws it funny on purpose so I win. I let her think I don't know because it makes her happy." She shrugged and went back to her ruined pancakes. "That's how you love somebody. You let them think they got away with the nice thing." There was a silence at the table. "Where does she—" Amelia started and couldn't finish. "Grace," Caleb said quietly. "That's pure grace. Word for word almost. You let them think they got away with the nice thing." He shook his head slowly, his eyes bright. "She's in there. Everything. Grace was, it didn't leave. It just moved into Emma, and it's still—" He stopped, pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "Sorry. Coffee went down wrong." "Coffee went down wrong," Amelia agreed gently and reached across the terrible pancakes to hold his hand, and they sat there, the three of them, in the ordinary morning light of an ordinary kitchen, and it was Caleb thought the richest he had ever been in his life, and it had nothing to do with the woman across the table's money. The year that followed was not dramatic, and that was the miracle of it. Caleb kept serving. That surprised some people. There were those who assumed that a man who fell in love with a billionaire would hang up the uniform, retire into the soft life, let her wealth carry him. He never considered it for a second, and Amelia never once suggested it, because she understood better than anyone what the work meant to him. It wasn't about the paycheck. It never had been. It was about the men beside him, and the promise he'd made a long time ago to bring them home, and the particular thing it did to his soul to be useful in a way that mattered. Amelia had built an empire on understanding what made people tick. She understood that taking Caleb out of the Navy to make him comfortable would have been like taking a tree out of the ground to keep it safe from wind. It would have killed the thing she loved, so he deployed when he had to. And those were the hard stretches Caleb wouldn't pretend they weren't. There were weeks when he was somewhere he couldn't talk about doing things he'd never fully describe, and Amelia was home with Emma, and the old fear tried to come back for her in a new costume. What if he doesn't come home? What if I let myself have this, and then it's taken the way everything gets taken? She told him about it when he got back because they told each other everything now. I did the math again, she confessed. While you were gone. The old math. I caught myself preparing for you not to come back, rehearsing it, building the wall in advance so it wouldn't hurt as much. And then Emma had a nightmare one night, and she came into my room, Caleb. She came to me, and she crawled in, and she said, I want Daddy, and then she said, but you're here. Like that was almost as good. Like I counted and I held her while she fell back asleep, and I thought. Amelia's voice was steady now, the way it hadn't been a year ago. I thought I can't build a wall against losing this because I'm already in it. It already happened. I already have the thing I'm scared to lose. The wall doesn't protect me from anything. It just keeps me from being here for the part I actually get. She looked at him. So I stopped building it. I stayed in the fear instead of running from it. I just stayed, and held her, and waited for you. And you came home. I came home, Caleb said. You came home. That became a thing they said to each other at the end of every deployment. Not a big speech, just those two words at the door every time. You came home. It held everything in it, all the fear she'd learned to stay inside of instead of run from, all the promises he kept, all the ordinary enormous miracle of a man walking back through his own front door to the people who'd been holding the light on for him. They married in the spring, a year and a half after the thrown glass. It was not the wedding the world expected from a woman worth what Amelia was worth. There was no magazine spread, no celebrity guest list, no spectacle. Diane Cho, who had become something like a friend by then, had gently floated the idea of a controlled, tasteful public element. You've earned a good story after the bad one. And Amelia had considered it for about 4 seconds before saying no. I gave them the true thing once on that stage because it mattered, she said. Because there were little girls who needed to hear it. But this... She gestured at the small backyard, the folding chairs, the people who actually loved them. This isn't for them. This is ours. I spent my whole life performing for rooms full of people doing math about me. I'm not going to perform my own wedding. The whole point of him, she nodded at Caleb, is that with him I finally get to stop performing. I'm not putting the costume back on for the biggest day of my life. So it was small. Marcus stood up for Caleb the way he'd once dragged him to a dinner he didn't want to attend, and cried harder than anyone. Sarah cried too, taking a quiet private credit for the whole thing that she had absolutely earned. Doris from the diner came. They'd invited her, and she'd shown up in a dress nobody had ever seen her in, and brought a tin of cookies, and told Caleb again, don't screw it up. And then looking at the two of them softer. But I don't think you're gonna. And Emma was the one who walked Amelia down the makeshift aisle. That had been Emma's idea, announced one night at dinner, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. I'll walk her, she'd said. Somebody's supposed to walk the bride and give her away, right? So the bride's not alone. Amelia doesn't have a dad here to do it. She'd said this with the matter-of-fact tenderness that gutted Caleb every time. So I'll do it. I'll walk her so she's not alone, and then I'll give her to you, Dad, and then we're all just together. That's the whole thing. That's what the walking's for. Amelia had left the table. She'd been doing that a lot lately, the sudden need to go fuss with something at the counter. Caleb had let her. So on a spring afternoon in a small backyard, an 8-year-old in a dress she'd chosen herself walked a billionaire down a short grass aisle, holding her hand tight, chin up, taking it as seriously as anything she'd ever done. And at the end of it, she put Amelia's hand into Caleb's and looked up at both of them and said loud enough for everyone to hear, because Emma had never in her life whispered, "Okay, now you're not alone anymore. Neither of you." That's the whole thing. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. When it came time for vows, Caleb went first. He wasn't a man of many words, and he'd warned everyone he wouldn't be, and then he'd stood there in front of the small crowd and found the words anyway, because some sentences are load-bearing and you find a way to lift them. "The first time I saw you," he said, "you walked into a room like you were walking into a wind, chin up, taking every hit, bracing for the next one. And I remember thinking, I don't want her to have to lean into the wind anymore. I want to be the thing that blocks it. Not because you're weak, you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I've known some strong people. But because nobody should have to lean into the wind their whole life. Everybody deserves a wall at their back sometimes." He took a breath. "I can't stop the world from doing its math. I've tried. I threw a glass across a restaurant once trying to stop it, and it didn't stop, it just froze for 10 seconds. But I figured out what I can do. I can be the 10 seconds. I can be the place where the math stops. Where you walk in and nobody's counting, nobody's judging, nobody's decided anything about you before they see your heart. I can be that for the rest of your life. That's my vow. Not that I'll fix the world. I can't. But I'll be the corner of it where you never have to lean into the wind again." And then Amelia, who spoke for a living, who commanded stages, stood in front of the man she loved and could barely get the words out. "I built my whole life," as she said, "so that I'd never have to need anyone. I thought that was strength. I thought if I was successful enough, powerful enough, impressive enough, I could make it so that no one's opinion of me could touch me. And it worked, sort of, except that it also meant no one's love could touch me either. You can't build a wall that only keeps out the bad and lets in the good. I know that now. I built a wall and I lived behind it, and I called it winning." She looked at him and her voice steadied. "And then a man pulled out my chair and asked how my day was, and the whole wall. 15 years of wall. It didn't come down all at once. You didn't knock it down. You just kept standing on the other side of it, patient, not leaving until one day I realized I'd been climbing over it to get to you without even noticing I was doing it." She reached for Emma, pulled her in close so the three of them stood together. "I'm not going to promise I'll never be scared again. You'd know I was lying. I'm going to be scared plenty, but I promise I'll stay inside the fear now instead of running from it. I promise that when the old math starts, I'll tell you out loud the way you taught me. And I promise that this child—" Her voice broke. "This child who walked me down the aisle so I wouldn't be alone, who taught me more about love in 1 year than I learned in 35. I promise I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the way she looked at me the day she decided I was hers. That's my vow. I'll stay. I'll stay inside all of it. I'm done running." Maane. They were married under a spring sky in a small backyard, and Emma threw the petals, and Doris's cookies were a hit, and Marcus gave a toast that started as a joke and ended with him unable to finish, and it was by every measure that Caleb had learned actually counted perfect. The years after did what years do. They accumulated quietly into a life. Amelia never got good at pancakes. It became a running joke, a thing the family treasured. The one thing, the only thing that the woman who was good at everything simply could not master. She tried for years. She approached it like an engineering problem, then like an art. Then finally with a kind of loving surrender. And the pancakes stayed bad, and every Sunday she made them anyway badly. And every Sunday Emma ate them and told her they were terrible, and that she loved her, and those two things had become somehow the same sentence. She did change other things, though, quietly, with the fortune that the world had once been so sure was the only thing anyone could want from her. She started a foundation, not a vanity thing, not a name on a building thing, but something real aimed at the specific cruelty she'd spent her life absorbing. She funded programs for kids who were bullied for their bodies. She put money into research on how that particular arithmetic, the looking at the body before the heart, the deciding who deserves love based on size, got into people so young and how it might be gotten back out. She never put her face on it. She'd spent enough of her life being looked at, but she poured herself into it, and it became in time the thing she was proudest of, more than the company, more than the fortune. You built the company so people would look at what you made instead of at you, Caleb observed once years in. And now you're building something so that the next kid doesn't have to build a company just to get out from under people's eyes. That's exactly it, Amelia said, a little startled that he'd put it so precisely. That's the whole thing. I want to make it so the next Amelia doesn't have to become a billionaire to feel like she's allowed to take up space. I want her to just get to be a kid. Get to be loved at the size she is the day she is it, without having to earn it by being impressive. She was quiet a moment. Emma gets to be that kid. She's growing up in a house where nobody does the math. I want more houses like that. I want a whole world of houses like that. And Emma grew the way children insist on doing. She grew tall and serious and funny. The funny came in as she got older, Grace's inheritance surfacing on its own schedule, and she never once in all the years called Amelia her stepmother. She didn't have a word for what Amelia was, and she didn't want one because the words were all too small. "You're not my stepmom," she informed Amelia gravely when she was 10, and a school form had asked for the information and made her think about it. A stepmom is just a person your dad married. You walked me into stuff. When I was scared of the new school, you walked me in. When Dad was gone, you were there. You're the person who walked me in. She frowned, working it out. There's not a word for that, so I'm just going to call you Amelia because that's the biggest word I've got. Amelia had gone very still. That's Emma. That's the best thing anyone's ever. You always cry when I say true stuff. Emma observed, not unkindly. You should probably work on that. I'm never going to work on that, Amelia said. Not ever. You can count on it. Caleb watched all of it over the years from the particular vantage point of a man who had once been certain his life was over. He watched the woman he'd married slowly stop flinching when she entered rooms. He watched the reflexive bracing the scan for who's judging fade and fade, until one day he realized it was simply gone, that Amelia walked into rooms now the way a person walks into their own home, and the wind she'd spent her whole life leaning into just wasn't there anymore, not because the world had changed, but because she'd finally stopped carrying its weather around inside her. You don't do it anymore, he told her one evening apropos of nothing, watching her cross a hotel lobby toward him after some event. Do what? Brace. When you walk in somewhere, you used to walk into every room like you were walking into a wind. You don't anymore. You just walk in. Amelia stopped. She thought about it, genuinely surprised, checking herself against the memory, the way you'd check a healed bone against the memory of the break. You're right, she said slowly. I don't. When did that? She looked at him. I don't even know when it stopped. I do, Caleb said. It stopped a little at a time. Every day, nobody did the math a little more, of the bracing went away. That's all it ever was. You'd just never had enough days in a row where nobody was counting. You needed a pile of them. So we made you a pile. She looked at him for a long moment in that hotel lobby, this woman who had once cried on a sidewalk because a stranger asked how her day was. You made me a pile of days, she said softly. That's the whole job, Caleb said. That's the only job I ever really wanted, not saving anybody. You didn't need saving, you never did. I want that on the record. You saved your own self. You were doing it long before I showed up. All I ever did was make you a pile of days where nobody counted. That's it. That's the whole marriage. A big pile of ordinary days where you got to just be a person. And that, in the end, was the truth of the whole thing. The truth that outlasted the scandal and the ovation and even the wedding. It had never been the story the world tried to make it. It was never a Navy SEAL rescuing a lonely billionaire, and it was never a rich woman elevating a struggling single father. Those were the versions for people who did math. The real version was simpler and larger than either. Two people had spent their whole lives becoming strong enough to not need anyone. A man who'd buried his wife and decided his heart had done all the loving it had left in it. A woman who'd built an empire tall enough to hide behind. Both of them experts at carrying heavy things in silence. Both of them so good at being fine that they'd forgotten fine was a performance. And they had found each other across a table full of cruel people, and slowly, day by ordinary day, they had taught each other the one thing neither had ever learned, that you don't have to be smaller to be loved, and you don't have to be stronger to be worthy, and you don't have to earn the thing that's supposed to be free. Emma said it best, of course. Emma always said it best. Years later, grown asked by someone at her own kitchen table how her parents had ended up together. This odd, wonderful pairing that the world had once found so scandalous. She thought about it, and she smiled, and she gave the answer she'd understood since she was 7 years old, and towing a nervous woman across a school fair toward a rented pony. My dad asked her how her day was, Emma said, before he knew she was anybody. When everybody else in the room was being cruel to her, he asked how her day was, and he meant it. That's the whole story. Everybody wants it to be more complicated than that. It isn't. He saw a person that a whole room had decided not to see, and she shrugged. He saw her, and she'd been waiting her entire life for one single person to just see her. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else was just details. Caleb Hayes had spent his whole life learning how to survive impossible situations. He'd learned it in the surf and the cold and the dark in places he'd never talk about, and he'd thought that survival was the hardest thing a man could be asked to do. He'd been wrong about that too. The hardest thing, it turned out, was not survival. The hardest thing was letting yourself be happy again after you'd made your peace with never being happy. The hardest thing was opening a door you'd nailed shut. The hardest thing was standing up at a dinner you didn't want to attend, pulling out a chair, and asking a stranger how her day was, and then having the courage to mean it, and the deeper courage to let it lead you all the way home. He'd faced impossible odds his whole life. And the greatest victory he ever won, the one that mattered more than any medal, was the quiet one. Nobody ever pinned on his chest. He loved a woman. The whole world said, couldn't be loved. And he was right, and they were wrong. And he got to spend the rest of his life proving it in a house full of terrible pancakes and matching socks, and a daughter who'd taught them both that the truest thing you can do for another person is simply completely to see them. That was the whole story, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.